Well, let's leave that. That's my first slide, I think. So how dry was it? Long-term average. This is weather out of the Graves County Mesonet site. I don't really know where that is in Graves, but somewhere in the vicinity of Mayfield. About 48 inches of rain. First thing I noticed in 1974 when I moved to Kentucky, it rained here a lot, compared to double where I grew up. And so, well, we got 2022, same location, you got 45 inches, so what's the big deal? Why is everybody having so much trouble having grass establishment? I have a neighbor who planted 8 acres of Roundup Ready alfalfa. I don't know if y'all have ever done that or priced that seed. The amount of alfalfa in that 8 acres won't cover this table. And we've seen that with grasses, everything people tried to do. I've only experienced the driest years recorded here. It was 87 was 34. 83 was a worse year. We had more rain, but it was really hot. But the whole idea of talking about averages on anything is not very good, and I'll show you why in a second. And y'all know that better than I do. Does it work? Oh, how did you get that to work? It doesn't like me. So here's the biggest problem. On August the 5th, you got 1.8 inches of rain. And up until then, we were ahead substantially on rainfall with earlier in the year. And December the 8th, it rained 1.25 again. In those 126 days, you got 3.6 inches of rain in 126. That's pushing 4 months, right? And the average event was 0.12 inches. And of all of those events, that 3.6, one of those was like a couple of half inches, and the rest of them are just scattered out that won't even settle the dust. And y'all experienced that, I'm sure. You've seen that. And so can't do anything about that. That's very unusual. If you look at the Lexington location data, it was 124 days and 0.14 inches on average rainfall. The biggest difference was we got a little rain in November, not a lot, but more than you got here. These were almost zeros in September, in October, and November. And so right at the time we planted, my neighbor with his alfalfa, you know what the worst thing that happened to him was? Rained 0.2 inches and caused that alfalfa to germinate. And then if what didn't die from lack of water got hammered on Christmas week of 6 below weather. So it's just one of those things that the joys of being a farmer, right? Or having a whole bunch of animals to take care of. Up, went too fast. And I'm going to back up one after this one, whatever that is. Okay. Now, if you're going to talk about weed control, we got to think about weeds as something maybe a little different. But weeds, these are plants because we call them weeds. We don't want them there. A plant's a weed only because it's somewhere we don't want it to grow. They're natives. Some of them, our worst ones, are non-native plants, and some of our worst are native plants. They grow where they're supposed to grow. Wherever that little niche for their environment, so they can germinate and emerge. And that's a big deal I want to talk about a little bit, this germination and emerging, so they can grow and reproduce, produce seeds before human activity prevents that. So human activity in weeds is generally done in 2 ways, is either mowing, attempting to do that mowing. Okay. See if I can find the either mowing, How many weeds do you really kill mowing in pastures? Not many. You hope you'd mow them down before they go to seed. That's the best you can do. And by mowing some weeds before you spray is the absolute worst thing you can do. And I give you common ragweed as the best example of that. When it's this tall, spray it, kill it, you 100% control. Easy. 5 or 6 different products. The cheapest one of them on all 2,4-D does as good as any of them. But if you mow the top out of that, you can't kill it with any of these herbicides, literally, late in the season. So in horse pastures, what are we doing to impact those? Any number of things. Hitting the right one again. I've actually had these work with me before. Oh, here we go. I wish we had the lights because you probably can't see this very well. This is a picture of, remember I said, an environment where weeds can germinate and grow. Everywhere in a pasture you go through and knock the soil disturbed, it may be as much as something as just where the cattle have tromped in the mud, or the horses. And that little weed right there, anybody know what that is? In a poor slide? It's actually not a bad slide, you just can't see it, too much light. That's one of your favorite weeds down here. That's buttercup. That was taken on January the 20th of this year across the road from my house. So it's out there. It's ready, it's rolling. When it warms up, it's really starting to grow right now. So now's the time to spray for buttercups. You see these areas again where something is, you have a lot of open areas. That's where all these weeds are going to germinate. And that's the hard part of pastures, is that you can do this. I don't know if any of y'all drag your horse pastures. We do a lot of that on the big thoroughbred farms, less so on smaller acreages. But everywhere those spikes hit and knock a soil open, that's a perfect environment for germination. Now, in a perfect world, you'd have grass this tall now. It's been that way for about 2 months, and you would not have any of these covered areas. You'd have them covered up. You wouldn't have these open areas. But that's just part of what happens there. It's got to wait a while. So these are some weeds that thrive readily under our dandelion. Yeah, it's a dandelion. Some more of the buttercups and other dead nettle. The thistles, we have about 2 main thistles, the nodding thistle primarily. Common ragweed, looks a little clover. Another one that we see a lot down in here is horse nettle, Carolina horse nettle. And then that plot right there, this is your favorite weed again. Those were the first plots I ever put out on buttercup control in pastures. And that was in southern Hopkins County, where then you could literally throw a rock onto the WK from those plots. And with the thing I learned, it is about as easy a weed to control as we have. Just spray something. It's got about 6 or 7, again, 2,4-D, cheapest thing on the market. If you're going to do that, there's not going to be anything mechanical that'll solve anything. Mowing is totally a waste of your fuel and time and money on that particular one. So this is why, and the other thing that makes this so hard, and it's the greatest thing about being a weeds person in Kentucky. We're on the southern edge of northern weeds, and you have a bunch of them. And we're on the northern edge of the southern weeds, and we get them all. It's great for doing research, terrible for you, because we can control that one in the fall of the year. We can control that one, and you have to spray this one in late summer if you're going to kill it. This one, May. This one, now, to be really good. Thistles most any time. The buckhorn planting and some of those, fall or spring, but before now, to be really good at it. So let's run through some scenarios. The other thing is when I get finished, if I run out of time, I'm going to be around the whole time. So after we get all the presentation, if you want to come by and ask specific questions, that'd be fine. I'll be here. If your pasture is established in good shape, don't have near as much impact, weed population will be about the same you've had in previous years. It's just the fact. Typically what we see on these fields are, over time, these perennial weeds, horse nettle, ground cherry, dandelion, the plantains, the docks, they are going to come in. And you've probably got at least half of those. I've never walked in a pasture field in Kentucky that doesn't have those two right there. And most of them have those three. They're just, they're perennial weeds. They don't cause a great deal of grief to you. They're not big, robust growing things. Oop, wrong way. Well, I'm still going the wrong way. Older pastures with poor stands. And I think you all will see that occur over time. These fall germinating species, the dead nettle, chickweed, henbit, poison hemlock, the plantains and docks, they're out there now. They germinated last fall. And the hardest thing I've ever tried to get people to do are spray horse pastures in November. I'm not sure what it is, but no matter from one horse to 500 horses, it's something wrong with that scenario. The buttercups are out there now. Get ready in the next, when the soil temperature on the surface gets to about 65 to 70, certainly at 70 degrees, all of these are going to germinate. Pigweed, ragweed, foxtail, crabgrass, and Johnson grass. They all germinate around 65 degrees. Start there, reach a max and just into the 70s. How do you find out what your soil temperature is? Anybody? If you're going to time some herbicides, you need to know how to do that. Everybody look on the weather maps or like Mesonet or any of the other things that are out here telling you what the temperature in the soil is? The simple answer is go ask your extension agent, because they really don't want that question, because they have the same problem I do. Weather data at weather stations is generally at 2-inch depth, almost invariably. That's great for corn. You know how many weeds we've talked about germinate and emerge at 2 inches? 0. I can answer that one. They all come in the top 1/4 inch of soil, 1/2 inch max. They're not unlike clover and alfalfa and some of those grass seeds we want 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep. That's where they come from. Tons of research by the weeds people of the world trying to answer that. And we just figured out the best way to do it. Go with the air temperature. These things are right up on the top. They're in little bitty spots that I showed you. So if the air temperature gets to 70 degrees and stays there for about a week, your weeds are going to emerge, you're going to start germinating. It's just a simple fact. I wish that some of you could do I've never seen much of this nimblewheel, which is a native plant down here. Do y'all see that? Anybody? Some around? That's too bad. I wish that one I've about given up on. We can't kill it with much of anything. The ground cherries, the horse nettle is the one that probably will start to increase as these areas open up on these older pastures. What about any field that you seeded in the fall of 22? What are your thoughts on that? You have any grass in them? Please, somebody, a little. Anybody got a great stand of grass from seeding in 22? Not many, would be my guess. So we were dry for 100 days or more, very dry. Uneven stands. Most of the fields I've looked at are about 10% stands at best. I have seen a couple of fields that happen to be under the right cloud that dropped water on them, but not many. Lots and lots of dead nettle, chickweed, dandelion, buttercups. The potential for here is great. I've talked with some people that are wanting to go out and start seeding now, and I assume somebody's going to talk about that after me. And so listen closely to what they say about that, because you're going to have to do something, because these things are just going to explode. Once we've got good moist soils, temperature gets right, and pretty open areas. So they're going to just take off. So what can we do? Whoops. Did I go back? Establish pastures in poor shape, continue with the usual, and in the good shapes, keep going with what you're doing. I'm going backwards, I think. At any rate, here's what, we're going to have the stand in poor shape, you're going to have these weeds coming in. And so there's a lot of different products that I will mention just briefly. So here's the list. There they are. There's 4 herbicides over there that will give you real close to 100% control of all of those. However, if you're using Duracor or Grazon Next, great products, be real, know what you're doing with your muck. Do not add that to compost files. Do not spread it onto other fields. Not only do they cause damage, they kill plants, because they will go through the animal, it will be in the straw and in the muck piles. So be real careful with those. So, and it's clearly on those labels talks about what you can and cannot do with animals and manure if you're going to use those. So if you talk about this year, how good's the stand? Is there any possibility of forage grasses still emerging? What's the growth stage of the grasses? That's important, because the labels say apply these on seedling grasses that are well established. Now, I don't know how to define that. I'm going to turn that over again to my colleague over here and let him define that for you. Wheat on LV4, very common, low volatile ester 2,4-D, says well established for pastures. If you're growing for seed fields, grass seed, it says 5 leaf. How big is a 5-leaf fescue or 5-leaf orchard grass? This big or much bigger? Grazon neck, well established with good secondary root system and shows good vigor. Well, that's a good standard thing to say about you want to treat with good, healthy growing plants. But it really doesn't say how big they are. Weedmaster, 2,4-D Bandville mix, well established. So it's really difficult to come up with a good explanation of, is that grass big enough to spray or not? And this is a question you run into even when a normal year and you've got a really good stand of grass out there. You still have to come up with that. One of my mentors, who was a turf specialist at UK, explained to this in very scientific method. to know if it's well established. If you can grab hold of the plant and just pull on it, like don't try to jerk it out, just pull on it, and it doesn't come out of the ground, it's well established. That was his theory to me. And I'll tell you, that's pretty good. But he was dealing with yards and turf, although some of these high-end golf courses are worth more than some of your horse paddocks. But at any rate, just in summary, lots of weeds out there. This transition zone, I mentioned that, makes it challenging to find. There's no one time we can spray or mow to solve this problem. Why am I a disaster up here with this thing today? Overgrazing. I'm sure none of y'all overgraze your paddocks. I used to tell people jokingly the best way to solve your weed problems in horses, get twice as much land or get rid of half of your horses. Most of you don't take that as very comical. But there's a huge amount to be said to that. And the point I really want to make, it doesn't matter if you've got 20 acres, 5 acres, or 500. These problems are still there. The biggest surprise of my career dealing with pasture weed control on horse farms is driving through central Kentucky around Lake. You see all these massive fields out here, and I thought, they've got more land they know what to do with. Boy, was I wrong. They're some of the worst overgrazers of the bunch, of just too many horses on too little land. Questions, right quick. Do I have time for questions or not? I'm getting close to being over. None? Yeah, sure.
Chemicals you're spraying there with your clover, established clover?
We'll kill most of them, and don't worry about it. There's so much clover seed in these soils, they'll come back the next year. Unless
It's spoken like a true weed scientist.
it's true. We did a ton of work, we being me and a couple of technicians and grad students, on looking at spraying graze on next at different times in seeding clover and all of that work. And the problem we ran into, we were seeding just old plain clover, the cheapest thing you can buy, and some really good named high yielding varieties of white and red clovers. And where we took the drill through there and the next year, everywhere we disturbed the soil, was white clover everywhere. And that's just the fields we were in, there's just that much out there. Now, yeah, you're going to kill some clover. Some of the horse farms I deal with, they don't want any clover out there anyway. So we can really do a good job on that one. But that, depending on your clover, if you spray, we were spraying in May and June and September and November, and then planting, or not November, maybe back up, October and September, July, and June, different time frames, and planting clover in October, 1st of November at that time. And we got the following spring, if we sprayed it, and we sprayed it the day we planted, was another one. Well, that next spring, that was about 100% kill, as you'd expect. We're just trying to make sure we can kill the stuff. And the next year, in the spring, we go in there and evaluate how much control we got. And we had clover in all plots. Now, it was hard to tell what clover was what because there was so much of that white clover just exploded on us in this field. But that's a good question. No one's going to ask about grazing restrictions. None.
I used graze on here a couple years ago. And the manure that I've got left, I'm not supposed to take it anywhere. I'm supposed to leave it, put it on my own.
You can spread it on your own farm, and as long as you're growing corn or wheat where you put that, it's perfectly fine. Any other crop, you're running a risk of killing it.
Well, if I leave it in a stockpile, which I have left some of it in a stockpile,
Mm-hmm.
it's got a shelf life as far as how long to leave it in a stockpile.
Well, we know more than 2 years. We know that. We've seen that. If you can put it out and spread it on your pastures, which is perfectly legal to do, that's the best thing to do. The other thing is, if you use that in hay fields, it'll stay in that hay for a while too. And you put that out into or if you use it as a cover to walk in your garden, so you don't have to deal. Then this is personal experience. About 6 months later, I can't figure out why our tomatoes are twisting up. And it dawned on me, you ought to know better than do what you did, which I took hay out of a grazon field and put it down. Tomatoes, any of the solanaceous crop, tomatoes, my wife's lovely other one that I don't eat, can't think of the name of it right now, at any rate. Those are problems. But it's easy enough to avoid that. But when I talk to people one-on-one, if you can't tell me what you're doing with your manure or your hay, then I say do not use Grazon or this new Duracore. Same active ingredient causes a problem in both of those. Okay?
What was the problem you said with
Duracore, the active ingredient of that, aminopyrrolid, is the same active that's in Grazon Next. And that's the problem, is getting into manure and persisting. And particularly, we've had a big problem with putting it together and trying to make a compost out of it. And the heat in the compost doesn't destroy that chemical structure. So if you spread that out, as long as it's on your pasture, it's not a problem. But if you're trying to put it where something else is going to grow, or if one of your neighbors wants to come over and get some of this good muck and manure and straw mess to put in their gardens, or their tobacco fields, or everything you can possibly kill has been killed with that in central Kentucky. So that's the only problem with it. It's an excellent herbicide. No, just broadleaves. If you're going to go after real bushes, what kind of a bush? If you're, buckbrush, a little short growing thing, it won't kill it. Won't. The only thing that kills buckbrush is 2,4-D. Just that simple. We know that one.
What's your recommendation for Johnson grass? I saw it was on the list.
That's why I didn't bring it up.
You want me to retract that last?
No, Johnson grass is really the biggest problem. We know how to control Johnson grass in every crop but pastures. I thought the simple way to do it was taking rope wicks and going across the pasture and wicking it when it's taller. Y'all have the main reason that doesn't work around Lexington, all these hills. Well, when you're going on side hill, that Roundup all runs to the end, and you got half of it doesn't have any wet. It gets dry. So if you're on a nice level ground, it works well. The herbicide Plateau is fully labeled for spot treatment. It's not as good as Roundup, but it's close. But Plateau doesn't kill your desirable grasses. At the rates, don't go out there and make up a 20% solution. Use what it says on the label, because it will kill all your fescue, and at high rates will kill your orchard grass. So those are your two. Roundup is better for killing the Johnson grass, but you got a dead spot if you're going to spot spray. Yes.
You said on your recommendation for spraying is if you got 3 or 4 days at 70 degrees. Anything it's like. Well, it matters a little bit, but one of my friends and one of our former students he works in Michigan State. He said if we waited for 70-degree weather like y'all used to talk about, it's July. So you don't worry about it. I mean, I don't see any problem with it at those temperatures.
Fully, that's totally up to the person that owns the horse. It's fully legal, so you don't even have to take them out of the paddock. Now, I don't ever suggest putting a sprayer in beef, cattle, or horses while you're running around with something making noise and spraying. But there's no restrictions whatsoever on you know, you horse owners don't like to have your horses lumped into other animals. That's what it says on the labels. Beef animals, dairy animals, and others. That's what it says. I don't make this up. I couldn't possibly dream all this up.
So is there a restriction on 2,4-D?